Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, Innovation in the Time of COVID-19, Developing and Scaling New Tools in the Fight Against AIDS, Tuberculosis, Malaria, and Emerging Pandemics. Thanks to all our speakers and participants for joining us today. I'm Nancy Wildfire Field, the president of GBCHealth, more commonly known as the Global Business Coalition for Health. GBC has been working with companies for nearly 20 years, leading the business fight to address some of the most pressing global health challenges, particularly around HIV, TB, and malaria. We do this in part by creating platforms like this, to learn from each other, to share experiences of what works, along with the challenges, and importantly, to collaborate on solutions that generate tangible results and impact in the workplace, in communities, and importantly, as global citizens. We're hosting today's event in collaboration with one of our esteemed partners, Friends of the Global Fight Against AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. Since 2004, Friends has been advocating for U.S. support of the Global Fund, and its goal is to end the epidemics of AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. It does this by advocating on behalf of the Global Fund to U.S. policymakers and influencers, educating them on the Global Fund's model, and convening substantive, outcome-oriented discussions on global health, with stakeholders ranging from civil society to the faith-based community and to the private sector. From the development of cutting-edge health technologies to new mechanisms for service delivery, innovation is critical to achieving impact against AIDS, TB, and malaria. The private sector has a significant role to play in this effort, and all of our panelists today have important insights to offer as to how they are rising to the challenge, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Innovation drives impact and allows programs to achieve the best value for money. The Global Fund has a huge role to play in the uptake of new innovations, and we will spend part of today's call explaining why the Global Fund is such a critical partner to the private sector. We will also explore some of the broader opportunities and challenges around the development and scaling up of new technologies. We'll start with a panel discussion with representatives from Cepheid, Vestergaard, ViiV, and the International Partnership for Microbicides. Marc Legon, Chief Policy Officer at Friends, will moderate the discussion. We will then move into a Q&A with questions from the audience and hope to have a lively conversation. We'll close the discussion with reflections from Chris Collins, the President of Friends of the Global Fight, who will synthesize the discussions we've had today and offer some insights on opportunities and action for moving forward. Before we introduce the panel, I have a few logistical notes. First, if you have a question for any of our speakers, please send it through the Q&A feature on BlueJeans. We'll be collecting and answering questions during the latter half of the webinar, and we will endeavor to answer as many questions as our limited time allows. Second, we will compile the key outcomes and actions that result from today's panel, and we'll continue this conversation on partnerships and innovation to confront epidemics and improve global health. Stay tuned for future activity. And finally, the recording of today's webinar will be available in the coming days. Related content, including key takeaways and a link to the recording, will be shared with all registered participants. So, without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Marc, who will moderate today's panel. Thank you for joining us. Marc, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Nancy. And Nancy is a dynamic leader of GBCHealth, which plays important roles in thought leadership, forging partnerships, public-private partnerships to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, and other disease, and serves as the secretariat for the business community's participation in the board of the Global Fund. Two things we hope to touch on today are the importance of innovation to address HIV, TB, malaria, and now COVID-19. COVID-19 with its direct impact on human beings and its impact as a disruptor of HIV, TB, and malaria response. And once technology and innovation is harnessed, the Global Fund is an important multi-stakeholder partnership helping to buy at volume, scale, and deploy innovations, and we hope to touch on that. Our panelists will be speaking in alphabetical order, just as a matter of equity. Let me introduce them in turn. Philippe Jacon is Senior Vice President for Global Access at Cepheid. He leads the company's strategy to ensure access to their molecular diagnostics with an emphasis on low and middle income countries. He's the company focal point for engaging with global health organizations. He's previously served as CEO of the Foundation for Innovative New Diagnostics, or FIND, which the Global Fund works closely with in the new ACT Accelerator to combat COVID-19. Michael Joos is CEO of Vestergaard. He's the first non-family CEO of Vestergaard, which, among other things, is known as leader in the development and manufacturing of insecticide-resistant bed nets for malaria. He was CEO of a global nuclear imaging company, Spectrum Dynamics, in a career which has ranged in medical technologies and biotech. Helen McDowell is head of government affairs and global public health for ViiV Healthcare. She leads global public policy, access to medicine, advocacy, and global public health initiatives, including public-private partnerships, some of which will come up today. ViiV Healthcare is the only pharmaceutical company that is solely focused on combating, preventing, and ultimately curing HIV/AIDS. And I will say that ViiV Healthcare co-chairs the Private Sector Advisory Council of Friends of the Global Fight. Last, but certainly not least, is Dr. Zita Rosenberg. She's founder and chief executive officer of the International Partnership for Microbicides. IPM is a nonprofit dedicated to developing products that will give women tools to prevent HIV and protect their sexual and reproductive health. Zita is a microbiologist and epidemiologist who for over 30 years has been on the forefront of research on biological and behavioral factors for reducing HIV transmission. And under her leadership, IPM developed the monthly Vaginal ring, the first long-acting HIV prevention product. So with that, I'd like to turn to questions. Let me ask a first set of questions that focus more on innovation of health products themselves. And I'll be turning to Philippe, Michael, Helen, and Zita in turn. Tell us a little bit about your company's or your partnership's innovation on health products and technologies, particularly for HIV, TB, and malaria. What new tools are coming up on the horizon? How's COVID-19 affecting or complicating the picture? And we may talk about how the innovation can be scaled up and accessible to the poor. So, Philippe, in light of Cepheid revolutionizing TB diagnostics and adapting its gene expert system for diagnosing not just TB and COVID-19, how would you speak to that question?
Well, thank you, Mark. And I don't know what is the equity in alphabetical order, but I'm happy to start the conversation here. As you rightly said, we currently have more than 12,000 gene expert systems deployed in low and middle income countries. And most of them have been actually procured by the Global Fund through their funding to support the fight against tuberculosis. They run our expert MTB REEF test that has revolutionized the diagnostics of tuberculosis in low and middle income countries. But as you said, GeneXpert is not just a TB machine. It also runs our HIV test, as well as our Ebola test, and of course, our COVID-19 test. It certainly participates into the strengthening of health systems in country by enabling centralized and decentralized testing. So going more into some details as we speak right now, we have delivered more than 70 million MTB tests to low and middle income countries under what we call our HBDC program since the end of 2010. But we also have developed or have deployed and delivered this year more than 2 million COVID-19 tests to low and middle income countries since the month of April, and this to more than 100 countries. And we've been able to do that without impacting the deliveries of TB products. And I'm sure that you will be happy to learn that this year, in the first 9 months of this year, we've delivered more TB tests than in the first 9 months of any previous years before. And again, all of that has been happening in large part thanks to the funding coming from the Global Fund. Let me also add that we, this year, earlier, have launched a new expert MTB XDR test, which is looking at resistance markers for isoniazid, fluoroquinolones, and injectables. This test will be reviewed by WHO TB program in December of this year. And of course, it's very important to people that have been following that field in the past years. We will launch in the first quarter of 2021 the long-awaited GeneXpert Omni, which is a portable, battery-operated instrument that will bring the technology even deeper in the healthcare system. And we do continue on our innovation journey as we are starting the development of our next generation frontline test, an expert MTB REEF INH that will be able to diagnose TB and give resistance result for rifampicin and isoniazid all at once. So as you can see, our commitment to support the fight against TB, HIV, and other diseases affecting the population and low and middle income countries continues to be demonstrated by our action. And you're on mute, Mark.
What are the challenges that relate to giving access to the poor in low and middle income countries? It sounds like you have been attentive in the COVID era to keeping intensity on access to TB diagnostics while also circulating your cartridge to use the same technology for COVID-19. But what are some of the challenges? And you're the advocate within your company and the liaison to global health organizations. What are some of the challenges?
Some of the challenges are really how to get organized all together to, in an equitable manner, try to deliver these tests to different populations around the world. And to that point, we've been working closely with the diagnostic consortium that was set up by WHO at the time, and really working very closely with the Global Fund that has been the pillar of the procurement of our technology in all those countries. They've been using an allocation model that was developed by WHO, and that is actually looking at this equitable sharing of the scarce resources that exist today, because as we all know, nobody has enough tests to cover the whole world. So we need to make sure that there is a mechanism that will allow for the best possible and equitable way to share the scarce resource.
Great, thank you. Michael, in terms of health product innovation, new tools on the horizon, perhaps complications from COVID-19, given Vestergaard's key role in malaria prevention, particularly permanent, what can you share with us?
Mark, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to participate on this panel. We are all in the grips of a pandemic, COVID, reason why we're speaking to each other over a video link, I guess. Whilst, of course, the world has been in an epidemic called malaria for thousands of years, one that we've largely forgotten about in the Western world to date. And of course, a huge amount of progress has been made thanks to the unbelievable intervention of the likes of the Global Fund and others to really go after this problem with vengeance 10, 15 years ago in the malaria field with great big mass campaigns of bed net distributions and so on. a great progress has been made since 2000. We've halved the number of deaths from 800,000 annual to 400,000, and that despite significant population growth at the same time. And at least 50% of the success can be attributed to the humble bednet. And it's quite an amazing device if one really thinks about it. We take one or two agrochemical toxins, we put it on a net in such a way that it doesn't harm the sleeper under the net, and at the same time kills preferably insecticide-resistant mosquitoes and all mosquitoes for a duration of 3 years or more. And all of this, at the cost of less than $3 a piece. It's quite a remarkable success story, I think. And as I said, 50% of the malaria rate incident reduction and death rate reductions really have been directly attributed to this humble bednet. Vestergaard has been privileged to be a major contributor on this journey, with having produced and distributed over 800 million long-lasting insecticide nets, and has also pioneered innovative new long-lasting insecticide net technology, specifically against insecticide-resistant mosquito populations, such as our Permanate 3.0 that you've referred to. However, the progress in reducing incident rates and reducing deaths has stalled somewhat in recent years. And at least one of the major contributing factors to this is the resistance that mosquitoes have developed to insecticides that have been around in the use of agrochemical use for decades. And so we need to continuously look for new active ingredients to stay ahead of this resistance. And this especially during COVID times, as health-seeking behaviors has changed, as population groups are more vulnerable potentially. We want to make sure that they're covered. And also these mass campaigns that the Global Fund and others are doing, but really predominantly the Global Fund, where they go door to door and hand out these bed nets. We need to make sure that they stay on track, ultimately, so that we catch the malaria season and so on. This is all a big challenge. Finding new active ingredients, finding new innovation to go after insecticide resistance and so on is a challenge. Identifying target active ingredients with the help of the agrochemical industry to check safety, make sure, as we're sending 200 million of these to Africa and then other areas of the world every single year. We need to make sure that they're safe. And we need to make sure that they're effective, that they do what they're supposed to do, that they maintain structural integrity, that they can kill mosquitoes over a long period of time. All of this, and to develop a new bed net is almost the challenge of bringing a new pharmaceutical to market. It's a long road. It's an expensive road. Costs tens of millions of dollars. And however, it is a relatively small market, and so it's not really an area where any one supplier or any one company can afford to put tens of millions of dollars to develop new technology on their own and at risk. And here is where we are extremely grateful to the Global Fund, EMI, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Unit 8, and others for putting in place money such as what they've done with what we call the New Nets project. This is catalytic funding, as the name suggests. It really helps to bring new innovation to market. And I've got to give a shout out to an organization called the IVCC, who in this space really help to coordinate all the players, the agrochemical groups, the suppliers like ourselves, and so on. And this funding is vital. It really is incredibly important as we want to get out of this stagnation of reduction of malaria incident rates and death rates, as we need to bring more innovative tools to market. As I said, very expensive. This kind of funding is extremely important. We want to make sure it continues, and the Global Fund is a major funder of the New Nets project, and this is helping to bring new innovation to the market. And as I said, all of this in the time of COVID is doubly important to make sure that we don't have a congruence of different illnesses by making sure that the populations are protected against malaria.
Great. I hope maybe later in the conversation we might talk with you about understanding how the users of bed nets, apply them, what you can learn from end users, and ways you can leverage partnership. But let me turn to Helen right now. Helen, how would you answer my question about health product innovation in light of ViiV's leading role on HIV-related and its focus on access to vulnerable and key populations?
Thanks, Mark, and really happy to be part of this important panel discussion today. So at ViiV Healthcare, and of course 100% focused on HIV, we can see how important innovation has, an important role innovation has played in phenomenal strides forwards with the HIV response globally. However, there is still a lot more to do. And whilst innovation has now made HIV a infection that people can live lifelong with, that means that we need to be looking differently at innovation to make sure that people can live long, healthy, good quality lives, which means we still need innovations to give people multiple options over time. And so at ViiV, our focus is about making HIV a smaller part of people's lives, whether that's people who are living with the virus or people who are at risk of being infected with the virus, or those who are family members or friends of people who are living with the virus. And we do this in multiple ways. So whether it's across, the very smallest of the people that we like to support, hugely important to us, are children. Children have been very much left behind in the fight against HIV, and that's why we have a huge focus on developing innovative taste mask formulations that are really suitable for children to take on a daily basis. And we know that that is critical to keeping them in care and giving them a chance of a healthy adulthood. All the way out to the other end, we need to think about continuing to ensure there are options for people who have exhausted other treatment options that are already on the market, because those people still deserve a long quality life. And so we have been obviously investigating new mechanisms of action for medicines that enable treatment and advancement of people who have multi-drug and class resistant with HIV. The other piece is about thinking about the frequency with which people have to take their medicines, and thinking about how do we make this a smaller part. So we have been actively exploring long-acting injectable medicines, both for treatment and prevention, and they are critical tools that we see in the future. And we're very excited, obviously, of some key data that's come out this year for both treatment and prevention with injectables. And I know Zita will obviously expand on the importance of choice here from a prevention point of view. But it's really critical that we think about both treatment and prevention. We cannot treat our way out of this epidemic, very much like COVID. We do need to prevent infections as well. So we need to be working at both ends. And of course, also important to us is the hope that in the future, in the not too distant future, we will have a cure. And so really an important drive that we don't take our eye off that. That is the ultimate goal, is to find a cure for people with HIV. Now, all this innovation is great, but ultimately it's no good if it is not available and it cannot be delivered to the people who are affected by HIV around the world. And that is where it's really critical for us to work in partnership, particularly with groups like the Global Fund, who have the ability to scale some of these interventions at scale, also with PEPFAR and other governments and domestic groups as well, where it's really important there to be a collective buy-in. But we can't be trading off one infectious disease for another. They all need to be addressed in parallel, and we're committed to making sure that we can combine forces so that we can efficiently, we can respond to that challenge. I think you specifically asked about the COVID situation. I think a key goal for us in this space has been making sure that we've had the right manufacturing and supply capability to keep that supply going, make sure that people can still access their medicines and avoid disruptions. We've also been really keen to make sure that that innovation doesn't slow down just because COVID is happening. yes, it's hugely important and impactful today, but we need to keep that innovation being driven in parallel. So we've played a very strong and active role to keep our research programs going. And we have actually had some data presented today at ID Week in the US, which has shown that extra effort was put in to make sure that our injectable program was not slowed down because of the COVID epidemic for treatment, which I think is phenomenal news and really important for the field to know that actually everything is not being slowed down because of COVID. So I think I'll leave it there, but certainly very excited that we've still been able to make significant progress with new options this year, despite the COVID epidemic that we're all obviously grappling with. Thank you.
Tremendous. The issues of access for those who are vulnerable, like children, adolescent girls, young women, and many other. Now that may be complicated by COVID-19. Last but definitely not least, in the cleanup position in the batting order is Zita. Given IPM's role in developing the vaginal ring and in general, what would you offer with regard to innovation? And in particular, you're unique in that you represent a product development partnership. What could you share with us?
Thanks so much for having me be a part of this panel. I've been listening intensely to the conversation and to the presentations. And, at my very core of my DNA, I am a public health person. And so to hear about everyone's efforts in a variety of diseases is just, to me, a testimony, first of all, to the long-lived nature of diseases, that you can't treat your way out of these epidemics, as Helen has said. You need a variety of prevention approaches to address these infections, these organisms that are, I always anthropomorphize them, but have, figured out a way to be very long-lived. And we've got to outsmart them. And I think we outsmart them by choice, by different approaches, and that we realize right away that these are formidable foes. And that there's no one approach that is going to get rid of everything, even with highly effective vaccines, which I truly hope we get for all of these infections. And they will be one part, but we're going to have to keep up innovation in all areas to make sure that we don't backslide, even when there are highly effective vaccines. And so I think that innovation is with us for the long haul. And what's interesting is that sometimes innovation occurs across sectors. So that, we think we're doing something only for one disease area. And then we realize when a new disease comes around, like COVID-19, that you can adapt all of these different platforms and innovations. So, I go back to the basic research roots, my public health roots, and I just feel like I've been here for a really long time, which gets me to IPM, which really has been here for a very long time. And we have been singularly focused on an unmet need in the HIV prevention arena for options that especially young women, but all women can use to prevent infection. And I think we know that again, one of those things that doesn't seem to go away is inequities in women's lives around the world and their inability oftentimes to negotiate safe sex and to negotiate with their partners and get them to do the things that they need to do so that they can be prevented from infection. So women need options that they can use to take HIV prevention into their own hands, or as we say, into their own vaginas, because we have developed a vaginal ring for HIV prevention, and this has been in development for many, many years. And as it was already said by one of my colleagues here, it takes a long time to develop innovative products and to make sure they are safe and effective. and especially in prevention, where the population at risk are healthy people, and we need to make sure they stay healthy. And so the bar for side effects for prevention is very, very high. And so all of this takes a lot of time and energy. And so over the last nearly 2 decades, we have ultimately been, I hope, successful in developing a product that this past July received a positive scientific opinion from the European Medicines Agency. It looked at the dapivirine ring with the same rigor that it would for a product that would be marketed in Europe, but this is to be available for resource-poor settings. And it is a silicone ring that contains an antiretroviral drug, dapivirine, and it's slowly released for HIV prevention. And it is largely non-systemic in its effect. The drug is delivered to the site of infection for women, which is vaginal tissue, with very low systemic uptake and henceforth low, if any, systemic side effects. And this was designed with an inexpensive drug in an inexpensive delivery system, relatively, so that we can provide a product that has very long shelf life and reasonable cost for developing countries, and certainly no cold chain. The nice thing about this product is that right now it's 1 month in duration. We're also making a 3-month ring, which will considerably reduce annual costs of ring delivery. And we're also looking at rings that can combine drugs, and importantly, HIV prevention along with contraception. And there may be down the road potential ways of looking at different approaches to STD prevention. So we think of the ring as a really important platform for women and for choice. And unfortunately, the unmet need for women is as great today as it was when we started this project. So my fervent hope to people is that you don't give up no matter how long it takes, because unfortunately the needs don't go away. And we need lots of different options. And I'm really hopeful that ViiV's injectable cabotegravir will be on the market as soon as possible, and hopeful that an HIV vaccine can be developed and shown to be safe and effective. And with all of these different approaches, we could have a shot at ending this epidemic. So that is my fervent hope.
Thanks for bringing up technologies that have been applied to other things, which Philippe alludes to, with diagnostics being applicable to COVID-19. Friends of the Global Fight in recent days put out an issue brief about COVID-19 and long-standing epidemics' impact on adolescent girls and young women. Some of the things that Dr. Rosenberg brings up come out in that, and we'll share that link on to the audience. Well, let me broaden the aperture and ask a second set of questions that are other meanings of innovation. You've talked about innovation in particular in health products, but what other forms of innovation are crucial and necessary? Innovation in service delivery, in supply chains, in partnerships themselves, in use of data. And are there any roles that the Global Fund plays as a catalyst? Let me start with Philippe, Jacon.
Well, yeah, that's a very good question. I think, as we discussed earlier, of course, product innovation is the key of what we do. And I just want to take that opportunity to mention one that I didn't mention in the first round of questions, which is this time mainly used in the country where you are, Mark, in the US. But as you might know, we've got the emergency use authorization a couple of weeks ago for a test that is looking for flu A, flu B, RSV, and COVID-19. And as countries in the Northern Hemisphere enter the flu season right now, we believe that's another innovation that will help everybody. And at one point, might be also deployed in some countries, in low and middle income countries. But to your point about innovation that go beyond just product, I would just like to take one example of what we do, which is more about let me call it maybe business model or ways of doing things differently. And the beauty of what we do in my field of global access at Cepheid is that we can test new things, right, and new ways of doing things. And one of them is that it's very well known in low and middle income countries, when you look at diagnostic technologies, that it is not easy to maintain the systems up and running, in even more when the systems are deployed in a very decentralized manner. So, the programs in the countries need to purchase on a regular basis extension of warranties, they need to pay for service and so on. And we understood along the years that we've been working with them that it was really a pain point, and also kind of reducing the potential to use the technology right. So we've been developing, and in concert with most of the stakeholders, including, of course, the Global Fund, because there is a funding piece of it, a new approach that we call Access Care. So Access Care is a program in which we actually, through a small increase in the price of the test, can provide service and maintenance to all the systems deployed in a country, and this looking at defined and agreed upon KPIs. So this has been already in place in certain countries for a few years. That is working very well, and what we can see is that the utilization rate of the fleet of systems is increasing very nicely, which is to the benefit of all, including first and foremost the people living in those countries. Thank you.
Michael, when I talk with you at Vestergaard, you can be very much on fire, as we say in the United States, about partnerships and data. What do you think about broader meanings of innovation?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I think, so often we are in the day-to-day transactional operational mode, right, of going after these massive challenges, Herculean tasks, quite frankly. And we often don't necessarily have the forums available where we can have more of a creative discussion around what other innovation could there be, maybe around efficiencies and so on. And some of those that we're dealing with can be, as unsexy as how do you deal with raw material price fluctuations. In bed nets, raw material price fluctuations goes up 100% in either direction within a 5-year cycle. There's probably smarter ways to deal with that. Another topic is the fact that we as an industry put 100,000 tons of polymer plastics onto, to Africa and other malaria endemic countries every single year. What do we do with that? Can we recycle this technology? Can we make bed nets from bed nets ultimately? And could this give us an environmental impact, but also help to eliminate raw material price fluctuations that I've just mentioned? And then, of course, what you've also mentioned is the digital realm. And here I think we have a lot of opportunity to use technology that has done really a lot of good things more effectively, potentially. In the bednet world, we send 220 million bed nets out into the world every single year. It's a huge amount, 2 billion plus already, of which the Global Fund has funded, a bulk or a large portion of them. However, a quite substantial percentage of these bed nets are not used every single day. In fact, up to 43%, according to some really intensive research, has shown of these bed nets are not used on any given day. And so imagine we've saved 7 million lives with bed nets alone in the last 10, 15 years. How many more could we save if they were actually used more effectively and more often? And so this is an area where we as a company believe data science, machine learning, sensor technology, and just a digital connection with the end user. And you will be surprised, or maybe not surprised, but in even the African rural settings, 80% of households will have a 3G, 4G connection within the next 3 to 4 years. So, the digital conduit is now there. Can we really go after some of these diseases, in our case specifically malaria, and in our case specifically usage of bed nets, by doing this more effectively? For this,
Michael,
we really,
we need to bring in Helen and Zita, so we have time for our audience questions. I'm sorry to move to others. Helen, how would you?
So to me, I would have a big focus on partnerships, and I think there's two pieces in particular that I would like to draw out. One, which is public-private partnerships, and the other is around community partnerships. And I think they're critical for HIV from our experience, but also critical in other disease areas and also in COVID. So touching quickly on the public-private partnerships. So I mentioned earlier pediatric dolutegravir, which is a dispersible tablet formulation of a product that is has been prioritized by the World Health Organization. And ultimately, we wanted to make sure that that medicine would be made available and accessible very quickly to the majority of children living with HIV, who, of course, the majority of which live in sub-Saharan Africa and low middle-income countries. So for over 2 years, we have been working in parallel with generic manufacturers and in partnership with CHAI, who've been supported by Unitaid. And we have been working with them to expedite the generic development of products. And for the first time, we had one of our generic manufacturer partners, Mylan. They submitted to the FDA before we even received approval. The second partner, McLeod's, they were able to submit within days of our approval in June, which is a record. And we hope before the end of this year, there will be a generic product that has received tentative FDA approval. Now, we haven't stopped there, and ultimately it's about getting that medicine, getting the countries prepared to introduce that rapidly once it is available at scale. And so that's also what we've been working with CHAI, Unitaid, and of course CHAI and Unitaid have been working with the programs PEPFAR, the Global Fund in particular, and countries themselves to plan ahead so that they can introduce this rapidly when it's available. And that's when that innovation will have true impact, and we can say that innovation is successful when children and their caregivers can get benefit from it every day. So to me, that's a really important example of how we need to take that innovation through to delivery. The other one is more around how we engage with the community. This is something that at ViiV, we are hugely passionate about. The community is central to how we operate and what we do and what we focus on. And we've been working very closely with the Global Fund on a program called HER, which is really trying to drive the engagement and inclusion of adolescent girls and young women who are most and continue to be most disadvantaged and most at risk in relation to HIV. And so that really is putting them at the center of it. So they design the programs, they are their voice, and that is a very strong and compelling voice, in giving them the right skills and empowerment and resources to be able to have an impact for their futures. And that is the other piece that I think is really important, and we wouldn't be able to do that without the partnership of the Global Fund.
Thank you, Helen. And Zita, do you have a thought to share with us? And then we need to move to audience questions.
Certainly. Well, Helen just so well described all of the issues that face IPM. So thank you. And I do not need to repeat any of that. I can tell you that one thing we were thinking about in terms of delivering of prevention technologies to young women and to women in general, healthy people, is all of the behavioral issues that we have been facing as a prevention field for millennia, about how do you get people to adopt different behaviors and take prevention modalities when you're not sick, and especially behaviors of young people in their feelings of invincibility in general. I mean, these are very long-standing kind of mundane issues, shall we say, that require innovation, because we've not, as a society, been very good at it to date. And so I think that all of these kind of partnerships, I mean, IPM itself has was established as the International Partnership for Microbicides. And without all of the donors over the years, there is no way we would have been able to achieve what we've achieved. And the partnerships with academia and industry, especially from the pharmaceutical companies and Janssen Sciences, particularly in giving us the worldwide rights to dapivirine. I mean, and I think every step of the way, we have seen a partnership, especially and most importantly, as Helen noted, with communities, because you cannot carry off these programs and design products that will be used by people without the communities at the forefront of this whole effort. So these are the innovations that I think we need to think about.
Thank you. Eager to bring in audience questions, and please shoot your questions into the Q&A box. Let me start with one from Jamie Bay-Nishi of the Global Health Technology Coalition. She thanks Helen for her comment about not letting COVID-19 prevent other health innovation activities. But she asks you all, and I might direct this to a couple of people, as the GDP of countries has gone down and available official development assistance resources have gone down, are there concerns about public funding for HIV, TB, and malaria R&D getting stalled? What could be done to mitigate this? Philippe or Zeta, do you have anything you'd want to speak to about public sector funding to sustain R&D, or any of you? Philippe, do you want to take that?
Well, of course I can take that on, but I'm not sure I'm the most qualified to respond to that question. But because I think that we all realize and recognize that the coming years are going to be very tough. They're going to be very tough, not only on R&D, but also on procuring the necessary goods for the countries to support their populations. So I think, in my views, this is the reason why we need to make sure that organizations like the Global Fund and others continue to be supported and funded right, so that they can, as long as this crisis is going to be with us, somehow help bridging that gap, because I think there is no doubt that there's going to be a gap. And so we need to find other ways to respond to it.
Do any one of the other of you want to speak to Jamie's question?
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, clearly we're all worried because we don't know what the future will hold. And I don't think any one of us can predict it very well. But I think to date, those donors who have invested in global health know that the diseases that they've been supporting to date and innovation for those diseases has not gone away. I mean, the need has not gone away. And I think in some weird way, the glass is half full side of me thinks that with COVID-19 front and center, that it may actually boost funding for other global health innovation. So we can't predict, but I'm optimistic.
That is our help at Friends, and we look for the business community and all partners in civil society to advocate for the need of it. Investment needs to come from the public sector and from the private sector and from the philanthropic community for this. There are two questions specifically for Michael of Vestergaard. One is, what role do you see for retail ITN sales in increasing access to and use of long-lasting insecticide nets? And then secondly, on the issue of collecting used nets and recycling them, how does that affect cost?
Thank you for those questions. And so the first one, of course, before mass campaigns were funded by the likes of the Global Fund and others, retail, bed nets were routinely sold through retail. In fact, Vestergaard did a lot of that as well. It turns out, however, you're not as effective for many, many, many reasons in that strategy. And certainly you're not getting a full community impact, which is what you're trying to get with a tool like bed nets. And so it is for the reasons of really retail having failed largely to contain malaria with bed nets, that Global Fund and others have stepped in with the funding and have done mass campaigns and have delivered over 2 billion nets to these endemic areas. So this is really the most successful way of doing it today. In line just quickly with the previous discussion, of course, what we all worry about is national debt with countries in Africa, national debt of all of our governments ultimately to continue to fund. And this is really where I think efficiency is in the order of the day. Innovation needs to focus on efficiency. How do we most effectively target, how do we most effectively deploy tools against need? How do we make sure that we measure that impact and so on? The second question, remind me the second question one more time.
It's about the recycled nets and how it affects cost.
Thank you. Okay, I mean, obviously this is a little bit of an unknown today. We do believe, however, because of the high amount of the raw material as to the proportion of the cost of the product, it is possibly feasible to actually pay for, the recollection and processing and reprocessing, really, recycling, upcycling, what we call, which you have to melt it down, make yarn out of it again, spin it again, knit it again, and all that stuff. We believe this is feasible, and it all depends on where the raw material price is in this fluctuation, right? If it's at the high point, it's very feasible. If it's at the low point, it's less feasible. And this is where the industry has to come together probably and ask ourselves, well, is there a cost-effective way to move forward? We believe both are possible. We believe that it is cost-effective to recycle these products and to save money in the long run.
One more short question for Helen, and it has to do with equity. You work on HIV-related therapeutics and prevention. There are key populations that don't have a voice, and their advocates in a civil society are crucial. What are things that do you think the business community and public-private partnerships need to be more attentive to in terms of the children, the adolescent girls and young women, the key populations vulnerable to HIV and any complications that come from COVID-19, before we turn to Chris?
Thanks, Mark. I mean, I think there's a number of things that we can do. A key one is giving them a voice and giving them a platform for that voice that is going to listen. And part of that also is about making sure that they've got the right tools to make people listen. And sometimes what we have done is we have supported, not only just through grants and programs, but also some business skills are really important to raising awareness and being able to get your message and your communication across. So some business skills, by sharing those with young people, it helps them get across their views and their opinions in a more compelling way to the people who ultimately might make the decisions around that affect them. And that obviously is a really important tool. So we can help them with some of those skill sets. I think, but the big thing is about the right connections and the platforms, because of course, there's no point enabling people if they just are not going to get through the door because of their gender or because of they're an MSM who that may not be something that's accepted in the country that they operate in. And they're all things that we need to help open the door with. And it's where it becomes a challenging space in some government organizations because of national or religious beliefs. But ultimately, I think the private sector can be often a bit more neutral when it comes to religion and politics, because ultimately, certainly in ViiV, our goal is irrespective of religion or policy, is about supporting any single person who is living with or affected by HIV, regardless of where they live. And that includes giving all of those different populations a voice and an opportunity to bring that to life, so that people can listen, and hopefully we can collectively do a better job at supporting them.
With my ardent thanks for the four of you and the privilege of having a dialogue with you. Thanks for the work of your companies and partnerships. I turn to the president and CEO of Friends of the Global Fight Against AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria, Chris Collins, for some observations, synthesizing what we've heard, and to close. Chris.
I just want to say thank you to the wonderful panel, Philippe, Zita, Michael, Helen, Nancy, great to be working with you, and thanks, Mark, for the moderation. This was a great discussion, and I think just reminds us that we need more of it looking forward, given the times we're in. You know, some of the key things I heard is just, first of all, the breadth of innovation that we heard about today is really quite impressive, from HIV across prevention and treatment, TB and diagnostics, malaria and bed nets, and then in COVID diagnostics. So an incredible breadth of innovation presented just here. In terms of the need for innovation, you know, some important things I heard was that let's remember that the need for innovation is ongoing. Just because one great product is found, there aren't magic bullets here. You know, in the area of HIV, Helen talked about we need products that work for kids. We need products for people with multi-drug resistance, long-acting products. So, and their commitment to make sure that HIV innovation continued even in the time of COVID. Zita reminded us that how critical choice is, and that, you know, one of the ways that we outsmart diseases is by providing choice to people so that there are products that suit different people in different ways, and how critical that's going to be. She had a hopeful vision of when we have a whole array of vaccine, injectables, vaginal ring, and other sorts of innovations out there, we have a shot at ending the HIV epidemic. Michael and others talked about the multiple ways in which we need to think about innovation. Of course, it is in products, but it's also innovation in supply chain, in delivery, in how we partner with each other. It's innovation in efficiencies, looking at things like recycling of products. And certainly right now, it's thinking about innovative ways of using data science to increase usage and understand how to do that. In the area of research investment, we heard that it's expensive, that it takes a long time to do the research often, and sometimes innovation is inhibited and investment is inhibited by the fact that the market is perceived as limited. So those advanced purchase commitments by groups like the Global Fund and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and others are absolutely critical here. Michael talked about how it's important to be thinking ahead in terms of setting up the purchase capacity, so you know about that. Access obviously is critical, and Helen reminded us that innovation is no good if it's not delivered to people. Philippe talked about getting organized from the beginning and thinking about how to work with, set up international collaborations around purchase commitments, including with the Global Fund and other international bodies, to, even as you're in the process of innovating, figuring out how you're going to, what your access plan is going to be in terms of purchase capacity and setting that up. Helen talked about how partnerships are critical in all this, both public-private partnerships and also with the community. How important it is to get, for example, young women involved in thinking about how to use products that are coming down, how to work with generic manufacturers that Helen talked about in advance of a product being accessible so that they can get up to speed. You know, overall, I think we've got really, we've got very dynamic people who are at the edge of innovation on this webinar, and that's been really exciting to hear, in part because there's a lot of hope here, I think, even in the midst of the tragedy of COVID and all the damage we see it doing to other disease responses. Zita reminded us that there's a possibility that, you know, the world could wake up and actually increase investment in innovation coming out of this, that we can do better in terms of understanding the social context and using innovation to help people that are marginalized in their own communities, including key populations and women. And that business has a really big role in terms of fighting discrimination and developing products that can help us work around the discrimination that we see in our societies. Everybody here has shown that they've stayed with it in terms of innovation, and they've been successful, and we've heard from everybody about how important it is to keep with it until we bring these diseases to an end. And I just want to thank everybody who's listened in, and everybody, all of our speakers for your thoughts. Let's keep at it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.